Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about why you should stop using the Vlookup function and start using the new XLOOKUP function instead. So we've seen how we can use the Vlookup function to perform our normal Vlookup tasks, such as looking up this value in this table, and for example here I need the last weight, so that's column 6, and I want an exact match. So that's fairly easy to do with a Vlookup function. Now the problem comes in when I enter a column. So instead of picking up the last weight value, it picked up the average weight value. And since this was a subtle change, this is one of the major flaws of the Vlookup function. And I've shown in the Vlookup video that I've done how to get around this by using a match function here. But many people are still hard coding values here. And the problem we see here specifically is that instead of picking up the last weight value, it picked up the average weight value. And this is a subtle change and it's not easy to spot, especially because a calculation like this would typically be done on a separate sheet and the data itself will be sitting on another sheet. So if you're busy in the data sheet and you insert a column, then you come back to your calculation sheet, you see, okay, there's still a value here, these values look more or less reasonable, I have nothing to worry about. So it's when you miss these things that there's a problem. We've seen that we can come around this by using the match function, but the point of today's video is showing how we can come around this by instead using the XLOOKUP function. So I'm going to do my calculation over here in full and I will work out the BMI as follows. And cool, I've got my calculation, and what I've also done is I've got the correct values here and I'm doing a check to make sure that it matches up. So I know that if I enter the column somewhere over here, this is now picking up the average values and I know this is incorrect. So it's also useful to build in checks to make sure that there are no errors creeping into your calculations. So let's look at the XLOOKUP function. It works in a very similar way to the Vlookup. We still need a lookup value. And instead of specifying a table array and choosing a column, we split out that by looking at our lookup array first and separately to that our return array. So the value that we actually want to return is specified as a separate array. There's now 3 other features which we'll also go through in a bit. If not found, the match mode and the search mode. So let's look at the match mode. We want an exact match. So in the Vlookup function, we would use false to give ourselves an exact match. And you'll see that there are also other options over here. The search mode allows you to change how it should actually search in the lookup column. But we'll just leave that for the default for now. And we see here that it does our calculation quite nicely. Now, if I do the same thing and I look up the height, and I want to square this as part of my own calculation, and I want to work out the BMI, and I've got my values over there. I've also got my own check to make sure that I'm doing everything correctly, and there we go. If I insert a new column here, nothing breaks and we are all good on the XLOOKUP side, and we see that it breaks on the Vlookup side. Another issue with the Vlookup function is that if you want to use an approximate match, in other words, you set this as true, your data has to be in ascending order. So your lookup values have to be in ascending order, which they are now, and which is why this is still working. But once I change that to descending order, the whole thing breaks. So the Vlookup function, in order to use it in approximate mode, your data needs to be in ascending order. We see that the XLOOKUP function is unchanged. Well, actually, let's show that if we're using an approximate match like -1, it still works, or 1 like that, it still works. So this is another good feature of the XLOOKUP. It's unaffected by these types of things. Now we've also got our search mode here, which allows us to kind of change how we want our search to be done in the lookup column. We can search from last to first or first to last, or we can do a binary search. Now, another neat feature of the XLOOKUP function is the if error function. It's actually called the if not found function. So if a value is not found, as in this case because this patient number doesn't exist, we can specify what the output should be, and we can call it, for example, not found, and that tells us nicely it's not found. Now if we had to do the same thing for the VLOOKUP, and it'll tell us it's not found. Now we would typically we would typically nest our VLOOKUP function using an if error function. So if that function is an error, then say not found, and we've now been able to achieve this all within one function quite neatly. There are other ways we can use the XLOOKUP function, for example, where we have a situation where we have two variables. Now if we had to use a VLOOKUP to look up the email address for Peter in this example, we would simply look up Peter in this table array, and we would return the value in column 3, and we want an exact match, and this gives us Peter Parker's email address. But we can see here that there's actually two Peters. So the problem comes in when you have a long list, you're unable to see if there are people with the same first name, and your VLOOKUP function is always only going to give you the first one. So it makes sense to actually search on both the first name and the second name, and we can do this quite easily with the XLOOKUP function. So we set it up by looking up this value, and we use the AND symbol, and we connect it to the surname, and now we can search on this first column of year, and then we use the AND again, the second column, and we will then use this as our return array. And again, we want an exact match, and we can leave the rest to default. So here we've used both the first name and the second name to return the value, and this gives us a much more accurate answer. And for example, we can change the surname to Parker, and it'll pick up Peter Parker's email address. The last area we can use this is when we've got a two-dimensional data table. So here we've got different currency pairs and the different exchange rates. So $1 gives us 14 Rand 95, but 1 Rand gives us $0.067. If we want to move from US dollars to rands, there are two ways we can do this. So if you've seen my video on VLOOKUPs, you know you can use the match function and the VLOOKUP to find the value. If you haven't checked out this video, see the link above or in the description below. So let's use our typical VLOOKUP method. We will look up this value in this table, and now we need to figure out what column to return. And this is where we use the match function, where we will look up this value in this array, and we want the exact match for that position in the table. And if we do that, we will get the correct value. $1 is 14 Rand 95. Now we can do the same thing with our XLOOKUP. Before we jump into that, I want to show you how XLOOKUP and the new dynamic arrays in Excel work quite nicely. So here we can look up the value for ZAR in this table over here, in this lookup array, and we can return an entire array. So what this has done is it's looked up ZAR in this array and it's returned the entire column. So this is a dynamic array. You can see that it uses this highlighted area to show us it's a dynamic array, with a formula being in that cell and these formulas below it being grayed out. We can now use two nested XLOOKUPs to achieve the same thing over here. So what I'll do is I'll copy this, because this is giving me the correct array to use for ZAR. And now I can look up my US dollar value in this array over here, and I can return the equivalent row in this array. And I obviously want an exact match, and there we go. So I've told it to look up US dollar in this array. Now we've got the correct row. Then give me the equivalent value in this array which was specified here, which is this one here, and that gives us our answer. So here we've shown we can use dynamic arrays to calculate the same thing. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Thank you.